All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition here of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. So we're back here in 2022. And ironic, I think when I first started doing this, I thought this was going to be a 1 or 2 week little project for students while we were just getting acclimatized there with remote learning. And here we are in January 2022, still going. I think, I don't know the exact number, we're over 400 different people. And so really happy to welcome our newest guest to kind of kick off the new year here, Erin O'Rourke. And she's going to tell us about employment law, immigration law, starting her own practice. And of course, one thing we do have in common is our love for podcasting. And recently, I think we both share the success there of the Clobby. So congratulations to you, Erin and Piper and the team of Off the Tracks there. So perhaps maybe you can start, give us a little introduction. Tell us more about yourself, your practice, and how you got into law in the first place.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And also congratulations to you as well. It's great to be in great company for the Clobbies. So that was really great. But my name is Erin O'Rourke. I'm a solo practitioner in employment and immigration law. I was called to the bar in June of 2020 after finishing articling in about May of 2020, which was right when the pandemic had started, but no one really knew when it was going to go on for or how long it would take. And hire back was very uncertain at the time. People weren't really hiring anyone. That's when there were like a lot of layoffs of junior staff at the time. So hire back wasn't really an option. And I kept trying to look for jobs that would interest me, but I wasn't really finding anything that sort of spoke to my interests. So one day I very jokingly turned to my boyfriend and said, what if I just started my own law firm? And he said, yeah, why not? And I was like, you're kidding. I can't do that. But I decided to look into it a little bit further and did some research into what sorts of things I would need to get off the ground and what sort of technology I would need and how I would be able to keep my costs down, like what the very bare minimum of what I needed to run a law firm virtually would be. And so I looked into it and thought, okay, sure, I'll give this a shot. I don't have any other options at the moment, so it's either this or job searching. So I think that kind of helped because I wasn't really leaping from a secure position with a solid salary or anything like that. I was just sort of left with the option of, okay, I could be unemployed living at home, or I could give this a shot and see where it works. And the worst case scenario, I end up being unemployed living at home, which is where I am right now. So I decided to take the leap and started my own law firm a few weeks after I was called to the bar in July of 2020. And so now it's been a year and a half. And my original goal was to make it until the fall when CERB would run out. So way back when CERB was a thing. But I'm very happy to report that I'm still going. And despite, a challenging year starting up during the pandemic and starting right out of articling, I've been able to navigate my way through it. And I'm really enjoying running my own practice now.
Yeah, I mean, again, with the backdrop of the pandemic on top of that, so you got into having your own practice, and you said, well, maybe it was going to be a short-term thing. You didn't know how it was going to go. I mean, I think certainly my students have brought this up in the past is of what it's like to get started and feeling that apprehension. First of all, you don't have as much background experience in terms of practicing, right? And for lawyers, we have maybe our articling term. How did you kind of adapt to that when you started, right? So let's say July 4th or something, you're 3 days into the practice or whatever in July, and you may get that first call from a prospective client and getting together, putting a retainer agreement, getting all the things set up. But what was that like in getting acclimatized to, hey, I'm my own boss and I got to go and eat what you kill sort of the mentality there with getting your clients and getting established?
Yeah, it was definitely tough at the beginning because, it's just you, and you sort of have that fear in the back of your head that if you don't get this client, there will never be a client again. So you definitely have that sort of fear when talking to clients and trying to close deals. And now that I'm more deep into my practice, I'm not as scared when I'm doing, client intakes and stuff like that. I can explain myself much more clearly and say, this is what my rates are. This is what I can do for you. Sort of like more of a take it or leave it mentality, because I have enough work that I am busy. Whereas when I was a solo, or when I first started off as a solo, it was just me. And it was like, yeah, day 3. And you're like, well, yes, I can do this. My alternative is not really doing much because I don't have a job and I'm just sitting here. So of course I will say yes to everything and anything, no matter what the client sort of wants from me. So that was really challenging at first, was sort of feeling like, okay, I need to do everything because I can't have any downtime. Because what else am I doing otherwise if I'm not getting clients? So that mentality was hard to change, but I think very necessary to sort of shift from going to just taking whatever walks through the door to really narrowing my practice areas. So, I mean, I started off, even from day one, my logo and everything said Erin O'Rourke Law, Employment and Immigration Law. And yet I still opened the doors because I was like, I need clients, so I will take on tenancy work. And, I did a bit of civil litigation and articling, so sure, I'll do that too. And I'll do a little bit here and there. And I think once I sort of refocused and said, no, I feel most comfortable and confident in employment and immigration law, these are the files that I want to take on, and really narrowed my focus, it became a lot easier to connect with clients, to work with them, because I felt more confident in those areas of law as well. And what I will also say is at the beginning, when I had so much time, was a really great time to work on the business development and really do a lot of like goals and planning and getting all the process down. So when I was in the early days, I would spend a lot of time going to webinars and listening to podcasts and just doing whatever I could to learn more about going solo and how to build a practice. And I believe my boyfriend was like, okay, you've done enough. Like, I did way more CPD than a person could ever need to do in that first couple months, because I was just so eager to learn more about how to streamline my process, or how to work with certain clients. So I did a lot of CPD and a lot of development and a lot of planning. And now that's made it really easy for me to help bring on help, because it's very easy and streamlined. So everything works a bit faster and easier now. But it was definitely a process getting from, the first phone call and wondering what to do next, or if they'll hire me, or, freaking out about what's coming down the pipeline, to where I am now.
So for the benefit of us that don't have all that time there, what could you summarize from all the CPD and all the information, maybe your own experience now you can draw upon? What are some of the biggest pieces of advice, maybe, and for those who are going solo or thinking about going solo, that you found really helpful from what you've gleaned there, as well as what could you have done, maybe in hindsight being 2020, if you could go back 18 months and say, well, I should have done this from the outset. Anything that you can share with the students and anyone listening?
Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest things is start as you begin to go on. I purchased, the software that I wanted to use so that I could familiarize myself with it and make sure I got systems in place on my software. I got my accountant before I even had a client, which sounds crazy because, I'm paying someone to manage money that I don't have yet. But these pieces really helped me in growing my business, because then once life got busy and once my business got busy, I wasn't then trying to, struggle and transfer stuff from like loose pieces of paper and Excel sheets into like a more sophisticated practice management system. So I received that piece of advice from another solo when I was starting off, and I found that to be extremely helpful in making sure that I kind of set myself up for success from the beginning. And one thing that I wish I had done, I guess, is more like sales training, or like working on my sales process. I don't like being salesy. I don't like the money side of law. I do a lot of legal aid work because I love it. It's like I don't have to ask for a retainer. It's all set out and easy and clearly defined. And to me, the pay cut is worth the stress of having to deal with retainers and payment plans. So I definitely struggle with that still, but I think I focused a lot on how my process is going to be once I have clients. But at the beginning, I didn't really focus as much on how am I going to get the clients and secure clients. And I think that was definitely a challenge for me. I worked with a business coach through the Canadian Advisor Network. I think it's called CAN, through the Law Society. And my coach definitely helped me through that. And, it helped, but that was back in like the spring of 2021. So almost a year into it, was kind of, we went through and we made a roadmap of like how conversations and an intake should go, and what sorts of podcasts I should listen to get more training on how to close deals and stuff like that. And I found that really helpful, especially because she took a very non-salesy, more relationship-based approach. And that really spoke to me because I'm not very salesy. So that's probably the one thing that I wish I had worked on a little bit better. Probably wouldn't have struggled as much through the first year, but I think that would probably be my best advice going forward.
Now let's talk a little bit more about your practice and focused on employment and immigration. So what are the kinds of, I know in particular, some of the students here listening are in the middle of an employment law course. So I think maybe that would probably speak to them right now. I mean, what are the kinds of things that you're working on? Obviously, employment in of itself, there's hundreds of different possibilities that you can be doing. So what have you tended to find across your desk, clients that are calling you for either of those areas? And then again, obviously with COVID, a big impact on those respective areas. I mean, you're starting off right during all of these new areas or new developments that maybe not be the traditional work and employment or immigration as a result. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about what's happening and how COVID has had that impact on the types of matters you've had.
Yeah, so I really love employment law, and that was sort of spurred through law school. And although, we haven't had something like the COVID or the pandemic to discuss when I was back in law school, a lot of the principles from what I learned in law school were still very applicable to what's happening today. It's just we couldn't say with any certainty what would happen, right? We didn't have any precedence on if a vaccine policy is going to be considered enforceable or not, because we've never seen a situation like this before. But we could look at previous case law and try our best to surmise what the court would be likely to decide based on how they've decided in the past. So although it's been a very new area of law, there has been some ways to incorporate some of the things I learned back in law school into my practice now. But it definitely has made it harder because it's not as clear. And of course, it's very uncertain right now. And employment is sort of an uncertainty. When advising clients, it's like it could go this way, but you're working with people at the end of the day. And especially at the end of an employment contract, emotions may be running high for a variety of different reasons. So although the law may say one thing, it may not always play out exactly how either party expects it to or wants it to. So I've seen a variety of different cases come across my desk. I have, people who have been terminated for no other reason or for without cause determinations. I've also had people terminated with cause and fighting against those sorts of allegations. And I've also had a lot of people injured at the workplace and then sort of going through the WSIB process or through private insurance processes in order to claim workplace benefits, and then dealing with employers on the other end of that when they're considering whether frustration of contract has occurred or not. So those are some of the big ones that have come through, as well as, of course, vaccination policies and questions whether you can terminate an employee for not being vaccinated, enforcing those policies, and putting those policies into place in the workplace.
And so you help on both employer and employee side?
Yeah, so that's one thing I really enjoy about employment law is that I can represent parties on both sides. I really like the ability to do that as a solo. I know in Toronto, sometimes it's very, we are a management side law firm and we only represent companies versus like we are a union side law firm and we only represent unions or unionized workplaces. So I really like the ability to sort of, as a sole practitioner, work for whoever is available on either side. So I've, especially in a small community like St. Catharines, I've had law firms refer me work because sometimes they have to conflict out. The bigger law firms are generally who the employers have hired to do their side of the agreement or have conflicted out on that side. So there's a lot of opportunity there where I've received a lot of referrals from lawyers saying, I can't take this due to a conflict of interest, but can you help out this person? So I've really enjoyed that part of being able to practice employment law in a smaller town that allows you to kind of do a bit of both sides.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly imagine that there's the potential that you would have, if it was a large company, that you may have one day, been on the other side there. But I guess it depends obviously on the area and who you've had as a client. Now, you talked about the WSIB process. Maybe you can walk us. I mean, that's something for tribunals that is in the scope for my paralegal students. But what's that like? And maybe you can sort of also talk us through, with respect to the pandemic. I mean, things are being more virtually done. What have you found in terms? I mean, certainly you can go to the other areas and where you have your matters, but what that's been like, especially again, learning. I mean, I think maybe it's a little easier. I don't know, for those who don't have as much, background in the olden days, as they would say, pre-pandemic, with those things, or how things have changed. But maybe you can kind of tell us how it would go from someone coming in saying, "Hey, I got injured at work. I need to make a claim," and what happens if the employer side is disputing that, or whatever the reason may be.
Yeah, so working with WSIB files can be quite challenging sometimes, because although the courts have changed to electronic filing and a lot of things are being done remotely now, a lot of government like organizations or through like WSIB and CDSA are notoriously paper-based organizations, and so it's very difficult to be working with the other side in a virtual world when they are heavily reliant on paper. So, for example, WSIB will not email me things. It's very hard to get an email. I have to request like a file update, and then they will update it to like a cloud that I have access to for a little bit. I can download them, but I have to make that request through a fax, I believe, or through uploading it online. But I can never get an email from WSIB, and usually it's all snail mail correspondence, which seems very, surreal when most of us aren't going into the office. So that's been an interesting experience, despite my pleas. It's just the way that the organization is structured right now, and they're not capable of going fully virtual at this time. So that's been an interesting roadblock in working remotely. Just having to make sure I haven't missed any random WSIB letters in the mail from my co-work space. But I haven't had to have any hearings through the WSIB process or anything like that virtually yet, but I have been doing a lot of detention reviews for immigration work, and all of that has been done completely virtually. But again, it is difficult for CBSA on that side to send all of the disclosure because they are a very paper-based organization as well. So it's like we're almost there, but there's still some lingering issues with making sure that everything is properly communicated across all parties, I would say.
So let's switch over to immigration since you brought it up there. The whole process. I mean, that's something where the technology different. Because they've obviously had to have sponsorship appeals where someone is overseas. They've been always sort of remote or teleconferencing since time there, right? But what's that been like? What are the types of matters you're working on there? You mentioned detention reviews and admissibility hearings, I guess, as well. Do you kind of do anything related to the IRB, or is it focused on maybe the immigration side or the refugee side, or applications and things like that?
Yeah, so when I first started with legal aid, it was back in June, I believe, of this year. And that's sort of when my practice really sort of shifted and changed, when I was able to get impaneled by the legal aid panel to do general refugee and immigration work. And so I started doing detention reviews through the Immigration Detention Review Program, which is sort of like a private counsel, duty counsel for immigration detention reviews. And so I've been taking on a lot of hearings through that program. And then through that, you may have a client that comes into custody because they were arrested and were found to be that they overstayed a visa, say, for example. And then they're going to have an admissibility hearing coming up, and then maybe an admissibility appeal, depending on their situation, or maybe a pre-removal risk assessment application, which is sort of like their final bid in trying to stay in Canada, or maybe a humanitarian and compassionate grounds application. And so just working through the detention reviews has opened up like a lot of ancillary issues for just the clients that I represent in detention. So that's been a really eye-opening experience and has exposed me to a lot of different areas of immigration and refugee work that I wasn't, totally aware of how it all worked. And I've been very grateful to have a lot of guidance and mentorship through this program and a lot of training through legal aid. So I would say the majority of my work is through sort of like the detention review side. So we always have a 48, 7-day and 30-day detention review, and then every 30 days if they're not released at that point. So that keeps me pretty busy, trying to get my clients out of immigration detention, especially given the pandemic and COVID outbreaks. So that's been a very interesting area of law to be practicing right now, but everything is completely virtual for it. So it is actually quite interesting because when I first started, it was all done over the phone. So not even Zoom, not even Microsoft, like no video. It was just like a phone call. You got a phone call and there would be like 3 other people on the call and you never really knew who was talking. And in a weird way, it almost made things in my head, like a little bit more equal, because you couldn't see anyone. Like it was just like a conversation almost between the board member, the minister's council, myself, and the person concerned. There were obviously other concerns with it, because sometimes the clients, like, because they can't see anything, it just sounds like a phone call to them. It was very difficult for them to understand, like, if this was a hearing or if this was a call before the hearing. And it kind of took away that formality. And if they're just calling in from a jail cell, then it's kind of hard to understand and contextualize it. But now we're moving to video. So slowly, I've been able to see my clients for the first time, which has been crazy to finally see what my clients look like after sometimes 6 months of talking to them on the phone. And everything is done completely virtually right now. So I never had to do, because I wasn't called to the bar, to do in-person hearings. But from what I understand, at least now, there are even delays even when it's virtual, especially with outbreaks, and getting the individuals from their unit to a secure place to do their hearing. Those sorts of delays when they were in person meant that you could only do a certain amount of hearings in a day, or you would be physically, sitting in the room waiting. At least now, if I get an email like this morning saying, your hearing's adjourned till 10:45, then you have an hour and 45 minutes to reallocate what you're going to do and work from home and log in when the hearing's going to start again. So there's definitely been some pros and cons and how going virtual has affected the immigration system and the work that we've been doing. But I would say most of my work is related to detention work and sort of like the pre-removal risk assessments and humanitarian and compassionate grounds and admissibility hearings. But I still do some spousal sponsorships and other work as well, but mostly, or study permits, other work permits. But for the majority of the time, it's usually through the detention work.
Yeah, maybe we can go more into the process there of what you're looking at showing to the member about why your client, especially with COVID, as you pointed out, should be released. I mean, pending their matter. I mean, obviously, we've studied at some point that some of this, if you're denied every 30 days, you're still going back into detention, right? And it could be a year plus, or maybe even longer now with the delays in your actual substantive hearing on what the matter may be. So what's that process like? And I mean, do you have every 30 days, some of the same clients coming back up? And what would you do differently this time versus the last review?
Yeah, so to kind of go over an overview of sort of like what happens at a detention review hearing is, first, the Minister's Council, who's representing CBSA, will make arguments on the grounds for detention. So it's their burden to prove that the individual should be held in detention pending whatever, if it's removal or an immigration proceeding like an admissibility hearing, or something else upcoming in an immigration proceeding. They have to prove that either A, they're a flight risk, which means that they think they will not show up for their next immigration related proceeding, or B, that they're a danger to the public, so that they are a threat to society if they were out in the public until their immigration proceedings are concluded, or C, both. So the minister has to make arguments based on their past compliance with immigration rules, past compliance with criminal rules, anything like aggravating factors, like how long they had overstayed, what steps they took to try and regularize their status. All sorts of different things come into play when the minister is bringing up their grounds. And so obviously always is the first point of attack is to try to sort of dismiss or dismantle the grounds for detention. But sometimes, unfortunately, there are not many things that we can do to argue against flight risk or danger to the public concerns. And so there's something called the Section 248 factors, and that outlines a few different factors that the board member must consider in deciding whether to release or detain the individual. So that's their current length of detention, which means how long they've been in the detention setting, the future length of detention, which means like how long it's likely that they will be in detention. So if it's, they have outstanding charges that aren't going to be heard by a criminal court for another year from now, that would strongly weigh in favor of release. Any delay, so if there's been any delay on either party, so the minister hasn't taken steps to apply for a travel document and a travel document is the main impediment to removal, then that would go towards a reason for releasing the individual. The conditions of detention and COVID-19 are a big factor. That's obviously where a lot of our arguments come from right now, considering a large majority of the institutions are on institution-wide COVID outbreaks right now. And then the best interests of the children are also always considered in a similar way to when they're considered like in a humanitarian and compassionate grounds application. So whether the detention is affecting any child that depends on the person that's in detention. So that could even be someone who lives in a different country, but is used to, video FaceTiming their mother or father every day. They could be negatively impacted by their parent being held in detention. So that could go towards arguing that they should be released. And then the last thing they have to consider is whether there's a reasonable alternative to detention to offset the concerns of the minister and the board. So they can look at different things like a cash bond, which is you give CBSA money, and once the immigration proceedings are all done and the person has complied, then you get your money back. Or there's a performance bond, which is like we promise to pay if they don't comply. And then there's different things like electronic monitoring that's available, but usually in higher circumstances because it's quite an expensive option. But if you can propose some sort of supervision through Toronto Bail Program, has an immigration process, or Salvation Army, those sorts of supervisions, what they call professional supervision, or a bondsperson that's able to come forward. So in the detention review, we're really trying to point out whether there are flaws in their reasoning on whether there actually are grounds for their detention. Sometimes we're arguing that there's not a nexus between the grounds for detention and like a reasonable prospect of removal. Sometimes, we're arguing the Section 248 considerations because there's not very much wiggle room on the grounds for detention, and we're more focused on the fact that, X person has been in here for 6 months, their criminal hearing is not going to be for another 6 months. There's COVID outbreaks, they have a child at home, and the minister has not applied for a travel document. So those sorts of things we would try to bring up at the detention review to demonstrate that that they are willing to comply. I've also had to get really creative with files sometimes. One of the concerns is people with mental health challenges, that they stay on their medication because their past criminal history has been linked to their lack of being on medication. So I remember reaching out to a pharmacy to see if they could pick up their medication every day, daily, to make sure that they were, staying on track, and presenting those sorts of arguments to the member to show, they're willing, they're going to go every single day. They don't have to hold on to it. They can pick it up from this pharmacy. It's got great hours, open till midnight. They can go in and get their medication. Anything to sort of demonstrate that the risk to the public or the risk of not showing up for their next immigration proceeding is sort of mitigated.
Yeah, I mean, and on that point there with dealing with clients and having their medications and mental health. I mean, one of the things we've certainly talked about here is taking care of your own situations, right? In terms of there's a lot of stress certainly involved in both of the areas you practice in, right? I mean, someone's coming to you perhaps after losing a job and very upset about the situation. How are they going to be able to take care of their family, take care of putting food on the table, or in a situation where they're detained, they're in custody, they don't know if they're going to be allowed to stay in Canada, and literally their whole lives hang in the balance. And now you're dealing with those kinds of situations daily. What do you do in terms of organizing, let's say, your own framework there, and saying, look, I need to be able to deal with these kinds of clients, but I also got to make sure that I'm in a good frame of mind, especially with a pandemic on top of everything. What have you found that's really worked for you in terms of over the last 18 months of your practice with all of this at stake, and still being able to, given our field and the risk of our own mental health deteriorating, what have you found and what can you share with students in terms of addressing? I mean, even you can draw back on your time in law school if that
Mhm.
helps there for students in terms of balancing everything and being successful.
Yeah, well, it has been quite difficult, and I'm really lucky to have a good support system in place. And the people that work through the immigration detention review program are amazing. I've had lawyers reach out to me when they see I've been doing a lot of hearings, and they're like, "Hi, are you okay? That's a lot of heavy stuff you're dealing with. Do you want to talk about it?" And that's been really great. But yeah, back in the fall, I remember talking to my mom, and I was going home for a visit with her, and we just were like, okay, I'm not seeing friends for this week. I'm not taking any work. I'm not allowed to do any work. I just have to. I just have to just reset. So I completely, because I was just working like way too much, really burning myself, and just extremely overwhelmed. And I just had to take a week and just say, like, I'm not doing anything besides making sure that I get, literally my only goals for that week were to make sure I slept properly each night, that I moved my body some way, and that I ate some healthy meals or food that I really enjoyed. Those are like my only goals for the week, to just really like reset and remember what it feels like to feel good because I was just so stressed out, and exhausted that I wasn't working well. Like I wasn't being a good advocate because I was so tired that I was missing small things and just not being able to fully show up. And so that was a really great reminder for me that if you let it, it's very easy to say like, okay, one more night of just staying up late and catching up, or one more weekend of just like grinding it out, and then everything will be better. But that's a really easy trap to fall into. And I almost fell into it again this weekend. Luckily I had therapy on Friday night, and my therapist was like, no, you will always feel like this. So like, do not work all weekend. It's not going to solve every issue that you have. You need to take time for yourself, and you need to make sure that you're okay, because if not, you can't be there for other people. It's sort of like you can't pour from an empty glass kind of idea. And this actually happened to me back in law school too. So, it's always learning and adjusting, but back in law school was my first big assignment. It was like what do you call it? Our first factum or first memo. And I just got so in my head about it. I was like losing sleep over it. I couldn't do it. I was overthinking it. I kept hearing people had finished it like weeks ago. And I was, really hard on myself and really stressed myself out to the point that I went, the day that it was due, I went to the library. All I had to do was finish the citations, like super easy. I love doing citations. If I had been well rested, it would have taken me like an hour maximum, but I wasn't. And I went to the librarian to ask a question about how to do something. And I just burst into tears, like just absolutely burst into tears. And so she brought me down to Francine, who was at Windsor Law. And she was sort of like the head of student affairs. I'm sorry, Francine, I'm totally butchering your title, but so I went to see Francine, and she just told me, she said, what were your plans this weekend? And I was like, well, we were gonna go, have a nice dinner and cheers to being done our first big law school memorandum. And, I need to work on this all night tonight because like I didn't get it done. I need to get it done as soon as possible. And as I was sitting in her office, she said, I just sent an email for you. You have an extension until Monday. Go out with your friends tonight, sleep, do nothing tomorrow. And then on Sunday, go and try to finish it and then submit it on Monday. And so that's what I did. And it was crazy. Like I couldn't have pushed myself through to finishing it. It took me, like I thought, an hour to do it on the Sunday after I was well rested and had taken care of myself and was able to look at it with like a clear headspace. And instead, I was just going to panic and sort of flounder and probably make a bazillion mistakes and just try to rush and submit whatever I could. So I'm very grateful for that moment in first year because it really taught me that, maybe the same techniques that helped me in undergrad sort of push through some late nights wasn't going to work with law. They're really challenging things that we're dealing with sometimes, and you really need to be fully rested and taking care of yourself in order to properly sort of think through things and serve your clients better. So that's probably what I would say. Just make sure to take care of yourself.
Thanks for sharing all of that there. I mean, I think certainly it is especially as a sole practitioner now, right? It's harder when you were maybe there's a debate on that, right? In terms of some of the people who are on Bay Street and saying, well, everywhere, you're dealing with those same issues. So not like there's one difference another. I mean, being a sole practitioner, I guess sometimes you don't have, you feel that, well, if I don't do it, then who's going to do it, right? Whereas if you're in a firm, you can maybe ask someone else to help you out there. What have you found about? I mean, I know you had the coach advisory network there you made use of, but do you find that there's like a strong enough support system within the legal field for sole practice, like solos for solos type of thing? And how have you kind of found additional resources and support being a sole practitioner with especially that area?
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit different because you don't have the ability to just walk down the hallway like I used to in articling. I articled at a full service firm, and pre-pandemic, I could just walk down the hall and say, hey, how do you do this? Or, hey, what's next in this file? But when it's just you have to be willing to sort of reach out and ask for help, because no one's going to know that you're struggling if you don't tell them. And so I've found that the solo community has been so amazing. And, I've really been able to lean on a lot of other solo practitioners to help me through the last couple of months and the last year and a half that I've been in business. And it really just comes down to being okay with being like, okay, I need to text this lawyer or I need to email this lawyer and, ask them this question and not being embarrassed that you don't know the answer. Sometimes it's hard because you can get really in your head. This happened to me last week where I got really in my head. I thought, okay, you know what? This is like the easiest answer. This lawyer's going to think I'm dumb for asking it. Okay, I worked myself up. I figured I'd ask. And they didn't know the answer. So when I went to a more senior lawyer and they didn't know the answer, and then it's like, well, maybe you weren't so dumb. It was that it was a tough question and that you weren't expected to know that. So sometimes it's easy to be really hard on yourself as a solo that you don't know everything. But at the end of the day, you're not expected to know everything. You just need to be resourceful and be willing to reach out to others and check in when you don't know what's going on. And so I found that it's just been really helpful to have other lawyers be able to turn to when things get tough, because there's no way that you would know everything all on your own. So I'm very grateful that I've had a lot of support through this.
Now, Erin, the one thing there, I mean, I think that we both have in common, right, is that, well, I mean, many probably being practicing lawyers and stuff, but is that we both started a podcast. Now, I had Piper on about a month ago now, and she spoke very glowingly about you. So maybe you could tell us about the origins of off the tracks there and where the idea came. And again, congratulations on the Klobby there. So it's probably, looking back on all the guests you've had and how everything kind of came about. Maybe you can start from the beginning of where did you and Piper have this idea, and what sort of the background, and what have you learned? I mean, I think, I feel I tell my students I probably learn the most after all the people I've got a chance to talk to, because it's such a great opportunity to hear such different stories about how people got into law, what they're practicing, and all of that. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more, and where students of mine can certainly watch some of the podcasts and get more information.
Yeah, the podcast has been truly amazing. I think we're coming up on almost a year, which is crazy, considering I don't even know if we had much of a plan beyond like the first 3 episodes. So it's been a really neat experience. So Off the Tracks came because we're really cheesy and we love this origin story of how we became friends, which is that we had gone to Windsor Law. I think we had one conversation at a party once in first year, and then maybe, passed each other in the hallway, but we weren't really friends until we both got hired to work with Pro Bono Students Canada. She was the summer and full year coordinator, and then I didn't work during the summer, but then jumped on during the school year of our 3rd year at Windsor Law. And we were going to training in the summer, and we happened to be on the same train, same car, and it was only us, just me and Piper, and we were the only ones in the whole car. And this lovely gentleman kept coming and serving me like endless coffee, and Piper and I just hit it off immediately and just talked and talked and talked the entire train ride from Windsor to Toronto for our training. And we just basically became instant friends, and learned that we had a lot of things in common. We share the same birthday. We are 1 year apart, May 18th. And we sort of talked about our aspirations, why we went to law school, the whole gambit from our train ride. And that's kind of where we came up with the name Off the Tracks, because we sort of, met on the tracks and have both kind of cultivated careers that are, what we call off the tracks, which are off that like traditional trajectory, which is going to a firm, working there for a while, becoming a partner. And that's sort of the path that we're sold in law school, and definitely pushed through OCIs and different things in law school. And at least I didn't know that there were so many solos out there. I knew that criminal lawyers and family lawyers did solo practice, but I didn't know how many. I didn't know how many people did other areas of law. Like I know solo lawyers that just do appellate level civil litigation. There's tons of different solo practitioners that are doing really cool work. And I had no idea about all these different paths that people have taken before we started Off the Tracks podcast, or before I went solo and we started the podcast. So Piper was a great friend to me all throughout, our 3rd year of law school together and articling. And she was one of the first people that I told about my idea to go solo. And I think it was like peak pandemic. I was like sitting in the kitchen late at night once, and we were just talking, and we were like, we should start a podcast, and we should talk about these things, because we were always calling each other and talking to each other about, this is so crazy. How do we not learn this? What's going on with these fees? What's this new fee they're charging us from the Law Society? Just talking about all these things that we had no idea about. And we were just sort of jokingly like, we should start a podcast. And then that was like in the spring of 2020, or maybe the summer of 2020. And then it sort of, went back to the back burner. I started my own solo practice. Piper started her coaching business, and we both kind of got busy with life. And then we resurrected the idea last year. And we've met so many cool people. I would totally agree with you. That's been one of the highlights of starting the podcast, is meeting so many unique people that have done so many cool things with their careers, that have taken so many twists and turns and haven't followed that, straight track. So it's been a really neat experience. I've absolutely loved doing it with Piper. And I know she said lots of nice things about me on the podcast. So Piper is much more eloquent with words, but I will say that she has been an excellent partner to work with, and an extremely amazing friend that, is just always supporting me and helping me celebrate my milestones. So back when it was like my 1 year anniversary for the business, she sent me beautiful flowers and a beautiful card that's sitting beside my desk that says the best is yet to come. And I love having it there as just a reminder. So she's literally been on the other side of every phone call of contemplating my law firm to what the heck am I doing? And now cheering me on as I'm getting through my second year in business. So we love doing the podcast, and we love meeting new people, and we can't wait to see how many more people we can interview. You have done way more, which is so cool. I don't know how you have done that, because we've done like 26, and I'm like, oof, that was a lot.
Yeah, I think it's just like I was telling you before, just getting a routine, and then you get kind of like schedule that in the day, and then it just kind of goes. And I mean, I don't know how you prepare, but I mean, we know how we kind of flung this together. It just kind of comes naturally, I think, and you get a more open conversation, like they call it like fireside chats and stuff like that. But I mean, whatever comes from the students or from the background there, I think you get such a great perspective. And it's also refreshing to know. I mean, when you think of, ironically, right? I mean, when you think everything's off the tracks, the reality is the people off the tracks are probably way more than the ones that are quote unquote on the tracks. And you don't realize that in law school, or you think that, hey, I'm the only one that's not articling, or I'm the only one that's not working in big law. And then when you really look at it, it's quite the opposite. But perception obviously changes that. And I think it's great that there are podcasts out there like yours that show to law students and the legal profession, hey, there are so many different paths, and you can succeed no matter which ones you do. And look at some examples of people who have done such tremendous things without sort of being in that traditional track that you're talking about there. So again, congratulations to both you and Piper. Perhaps maybe now on that note there, and it's also great again talking so glowingly about her that to have people cheering you on in the profession. I think you need to celebrate those wins because it is a very tough and it is very draining sometimes. And so maybe to conclude here, thank you so much again, Erin, for taking the time. Maybe any final words of wisdom for all the students and anyone listening about any things that we've talked about or haven't talked about here today. In terms of drawing upon your last 18 months there in practice or in getting to that point, any final words of wisdom for the students? And again, all the best is yet to come. So I think that's a great thing there as well for you. So all the best to you in your future as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I guess my final word of wisdom would be, not to get too caught up in what you think other people will think of you. If I had worried about what my classmates would have thought of me going solo straight out of articling, I could have easily talked myself out of it, thinking everyone's going to think I'm crazy. They're going to think that I am just totally stupid for starting my own law firm during a pandemic, and that I don't know anything. And, I could have easily talked myself out of taking this leap. And I'm so glad that I didn't let that get to me. And so I would just, listen to yourself, not let, prestige or ego or, others sort of cloud your judgment, and just really trust your gut and go for it and do what makes you happy, because no one else will do it for you. So yeah, very excited. The best is yet to come, and hope everyone takes that wisdom with them as well.
Perfect. So all the best then, Erin. Send my regards there as well to Piper. All the best in everything there that you're doing. And thanks again for taking the time and joining us. And thanks for everyone for tuning in. And okay, we'll be back keeping this going as strong as possible for the days and weeks and months and years to come. Again, who knows how long everything is going. So thanks for everyone for tuning in, and see you again hopefully tomorrow at 6 o'clock for the students, not at 5. Take care.